Tab the village that wakes only in autumn. On the first morning of autumn, Elias Vale took the wrong road. He would later think of this as the most important mistake of his life. At the time, however, it felt like one more inconvenience in a season already crowded with them. His car had begun making a faint clicking sound somewhere beneath the dashboard. His phone had lost its signal 20 minutes earlier. The paper map on the passenger seat was old enough to show roads that no longer existed and omit several that did. And the country lane ahead of him had narrowed so gradually that Elias had not noticed anything was wrong until the pavement gave way to pale gravel. He stopped. The engine ticked softly. Beyond the windshield, the road curved between fields of tall grass silvered by the early morning. A low stone wall wandered beside it. Beyond that stood a line of maple trees, their upper leaves already touched with red. Elias looked at the map, then at the road, then back at the map. There was no road here. He had been driving north toward Bellwether County, where he intended to spend several quiet weeks settling the affairs of his late aunt. There was a house to inspect, a lawyer to meet, furniture to sort through, and boxes of family things nobody else wanted. He had told himself he didn't mind. For the past 12 years, Elias had made a profession of not minding things. He didn't mind traveling alone. He didn't mind hotel rooms. He didn't mind eating dinner at counters or airport cafes. He didn't mind that his work as a surveyor sent him from one county to another, measuring boundaries for people who usually disagreed about where those boundaries ought to be. And he certainly didn't mind that at 42, nearly everyone he had once known well had become someone he exchanged birthday messages with once a year. He was tired, though. That much he could admit. Tired enough that when he saw a wooden sign standing crookedly at the next bend, he felt a surprising amount of relief. The sign said, Briar Glen, 3 miles. Below the words, someone had painted a small cluster of orange leaves. Elias searched the map again. No Briar Glen. Still, a village meant people. People meant directions, and perhaps coffee. He drove on. The road entered the trees. Almost immediately the world changed. The fields disappeared behind him, and the forest gathered close around the road. The branches overhead were heavy with color, gold, copper, russet, and deep red. Fallen leaves moved across the gravel in little whispering circles. The morning sun came through in long beams. Elias lowered his window. The air smelled of cold earth, wood smoke, and something sweet he couldn't identify. Apples, perhaps, or cinnamon. For the first time in weeks, he turned off the radio. The road descended. The trees opened. And there was Briar Glen. It rested in a wide green valley surrounded on 3 sides by wooded hills. A narrow river curved along its eastern edge, bright as a ribbon of glass. There were perhaps 60 houses. A white church stood near the center, though its bell tower was unusually short. Beyond it lay a square surrounded by shops with painted signs. Farther away, Elias could see barns, orchards, vegetable fields, and a mill beside the river. Smoke rose from chimneys. People walked along the streets carrying baskets. A boy rode past on a bicycle with a loaf of bread under one arm. Nothing about the village seemed remarkable, and yet Elias slowed almost to a stop. He had the strange feeling that he had seen it before. Not exactly this village. Something about the arrangement of the hills, the river, the low stone bridge, a row of poplars along the western road. For a moment an image came to him, a woman's hand holding his, red leaves beneath small shoes, someone laughing nearby. Then it was gone. A horn sounded behind him. Elias startled. An old blue truck had appeared. The driver leaned out. You planning to admire the view all morning? Elias lifted a hand apologetically. The driver grinned. No hurry, just wondering. Elias drove on. He parked in the square beside a stone fountain. A clock above the general store said 8:15. He noticed something curious immediately. Nearly everyone in the square seemed busy. Not hurried, busy. 2 women were hanging garlands of dried corn along a storefront. An elderly man was painting the legs of a bench. 3 children carried pumpkins from a wagon. Someone swept the steps of the town hall. There was an energy to the village that reminded Elias of a house being prepared for guests. Across the square stood a café called the Copper Kettle. That was enough to decide his next move. A bell chimed when he entered. Warm air met him, carrying the smell of coffee, baked apples, and fresh bread. There were 6 tables. 4 were occupied. A woman behind the counter was arranging pastries beneath a glass cover. She looked to be about Elias's age, perhaps a little younger. Her dark hair was tied loosely behind her head, and she wore a green sweater with the sleeves pushed to her elbows. She glanced up. For half a second she stopped moving. Elias noticed. Then she smiled. "Morning. Morning. You look lost. Is it that obvious? Only because nobody comes through Briar Glen by accident." "I did." Her smile changed slightly, apparently. Elias approached the counter. "Coffee? Please. Food?" He considered the pastries. "Whatever smells like apples. That would be almost everything today." "Then surprise me." She poured his coffee and placed a warm apple cake on a plate. Elias carried both to a table near the window. Outside, people continued decorating the square. The woman came over a few minutes later. "You're not from Bellwether," she said. "No." "Where are you headed?" "North. I'm supposed to meet a lawyer this afternoon." "Then you've gone considerably wrong." "I suspected that." She pointed toward the window. "Take the eastern road out of town. Cross the stone bridge. Keep going until the woods end. You'll meet the county highway in about 12 miles. "Thank you." She nodded. Then she looked at him again. This time her expression was thoughtful. "What's your name?" "Elias Vale." The coffee cup slipped from her hand. It didn't fall far. She caught it against the table, spilling only a little into the saucer. But the sound made several people look over. The cafe became strangely quiet. Elias glanced around. A man reading a newspaper lowered it. An elderly woman at the next table stared openly at him. The woman from the counter recovered quickly. "Sorry." She took a cloth from her apron. "Slippery cup." Elias watched her wipe the table. "You know my name?" "No. Someone does." The elderly woman looked away. The newspaper rose again. Elias frowned. The cafe owner straightened. "My name is Maribel." She offered her hand. Elias shook it. Her hand was warm. "Nice to meet you, Elias Vale." Something about the way she said his full name made him uneasy. Not frightened, only curious. He finished breakfast slowly. By 9, he was back in his car. He drove east. The road crossed the river. He followed it through the woods. After perhaps 15 minutes, the car began clicking again. Then the engine coughed. "Oh, don't!" It coughed twice more. A warning light appeared. Elias pulled onto the grass. The engine died. He sat with both hands on the wheel. Through the windshield, yellow leaves drifted lazily onto the road. Of course. There was no phone signal, no houses, no traffic. He opened the hood, stared at an engine he understood only slightly better than ancient Greek, and eventually accepted the obvious. He would have to walk back. By the time Elias returned to Briar Glen, it was nearly 11. Mara was outside the cafe, setting small pots of chrysanthemums along the windows. She looked up. "That was quick." "My car died." "Where?" "About 6 miles past the bridge." She nodded as though this were unsurprising. "Thomas can tow it." "Thomas? Mechanic." "Good. Although he won't have the part." Elias blinked. "You don't even know what's wrong." "Thomas never has the part." Despite himself, Elias laughed. Mara smiled. "There, you're improving already." Thomas turned out to be the man from the blue truck. He drove Elias back to the car, examined the engine, scratched his gray beard, and said, "Fuel pump." "Can you fix it?" "Certainly." "Today?" "No." "Tomorrow?" "No." "Why not?" Thomas looked genuinely puzzled. "Part won't come until October." Elias stared at him. "It's September 23rd. "Exactly. That's more than a week. 8 days. I have an appointment today. Then I recommend borrowing a telephone. My phone has no signal. Nobody's does." Thomas closed the hood. "Town hall has a landline." The lawyer was surprisingly understanding. The house could wait. The paperwork could wait. Almost everything, Elias discovered, could wait if one simply told people the truth. He booked a room at the village inn. The innkeeper, Mrs. Alder, gave him a key with the number 7 on a brass tag. When she heard his name, she gave him the same startled look Mara had. This time, Elias didn't ignore it. "You know me." Mrs. Alder adjusted her glasses. "I knew someone with your name." "Who?" But she only smiled sadly. "You should ask Mara." His room overlooked the square. It had a broad bed, a wooden wardrobe, and a window seat covered with a faded blue cushion. On the desk stood a small ceramic bowl filled with acorns. There was no television, no telephone. Elias unpacked. He had intended to stay one night. Somehow he found himself putting his clothes in the drawers. That afternoon he walked through Briar Glen. The village was larger than it had seemed from the hill. There was a blacksmith, though he mostly repaired farm equipment. A bakery, a tiny post office, a schoolhouse, a carpenter's shop, a tailor, a grocer with apples stacked in pyramids outside. People greeted Elias. Some greeted him twice. Almost everyone seemed to know he was the stranger whose car had broken down, and several knew his name before he introduced himself. Near sunset, Elias found Mara beside the river. She was sitting on the stone bridge with a basket beside her. "You've been avoiding me," he said. "I've been picking blackberries." "Can both be true?" She looked at him. Yes. He sat beside her. The river moved slowly beneath them. Somewhere upstream, a dog barked. "Mrs. Alder told me to ask you." Of course she did. "Why does everyone recognize my name?" Mara selected a blackberry. "They don't recognize your name." "They certainly react to it. They recognize your mother's." Elias went still. "My mother?" Her name was Clara Vale. He looked at her. "How do you know that?" Mara dropped the blackberry into the basket. "Because she grew up here." The forest seemed suddenly very quiet. Elias gave a short laugh. "No, she didn't." "She did. My mother grew up in Pennsylvania. Eventually. She never mentioned Briar Glen." "I know." "You knew her?" Mara nodded. "I was a child when she left." Elias stood. "This doesn't make sense." "No. My mother died 26 years ago." "I know that too." He looked down at her. "How?" Mara's expression held something he couldn't read. Sadness, perhaps, and recognition. "Because," she said, "your grandmother still lives here." Elias did not speak. Mara stood and lifted the basket. "Her name is Evelyn Vale. My grandmother died before I was born." "No." "That's what my mother told me." "I know." Elias stared toward the village. Smoke rose peacefully from chimneys. "A church bell rang once. Where is she?" Mara nodded toward the western hill. "White House beside the orchard." They walked there together. Neither spoke much. The White House stood beyond the last row of village homes, beneath two enormous maple trees. A woman sat on the porch. She was old. Not frail, exactly. Simply old in the calm, complete way of someone who had long ago stopped being surprised by time. She wore a brown cardigan and held a cup in both hands. When Elias reached the gate, she looked at him. The cup trembled. "Elias?" His throat tightened. He had never seen her. Yet something in her face was familiar. The shape of her eyes, his mother's eyes, his eyes. Evelyn Vale stood. "Oh," she whispered. Then she covered her mouth. Elias remained by the gate. Neither of them seemed to know what to do. Finally, Evelyn laughed through her tears. "You've got Clara's stubborn eyebrows." It was such an absurd thing to say that Elias laughed too. And somehow that allowed them to cross the distance. His grandmother hugged him. She smelled of soap, apples, and wood smoke. For several seconds, Elias stood stiffly. Then he put his arms around her. That evening he stayed for dinner. Mara stayed too. They ate roasted chicken with carrots and onions, fresh bread, apple chutney, and a pie Evelyn insisted she had ruined. It was excellent. Elias asked questions. Evelyn answered some. His mother had been born in Briar Glen. She had lived there until she was 19. She had loved horses, hated sewing, climbed trees and dresses, and once released 12 frogs inside the schoolhouse because a teacher had called her unladylike. Elias laughed more that evening than he had in months. But whenever he asked why Clara had left, Evelyn became quiet. And whenever he asked why she had told him his grandmother was dead, nobody answered directly. Eventually, Elias put down his fork. "There's something all of you aren't telling me." Evelyn looked at Mara. Mara looked at Evelyn. "Tomorrow," Evelyn said. "Why tomorrow?" "Because tonight you've only just arrived." "That doesn't answer anything." "No." His grandmother smiled gently, "But tomorrow will." Elias slept badly. At dawn, church bells woke him. He dressed and went outside. The village square had transformed overnight. Long tables stood beneath the trees. Garlands crossed the street. Baskets of apples, squash, corn, and late tomatoes had appeared outside the town hall. Mara was directing 3 teenagers carrying a wooden arch. "What is all this?" "The first harvest." "Today?" "Every year." Elias looked around. "Everyone seems very committed. We have limited time." There it was again. He had heard variations of the phrase all day. Before October. While there's time? This month? Not yet. He caught Mara's eye. "What happens in October?" She became still. "Elias." "What happens?" A little girl ran past carrying ribbons. Mara waited until she was gone. Then she said quietly, "Briar Glen disappears." Elias stared at her. "Disappears." "Yes, for winter, for everything." He laughed once. Mara didn't. "You actually believe that?" "I don't believe it. I live it." Elias folded his arms. Where does it go? We don't know. You expect me to accept that? No. Good. We have 8 days left. He studied her face. There was no joke in it. Mara looked toward the hills. Every year, on September 1st, Briar Glen returns. Returns from where? We don't know. And on September 30th, at sunset, the village disappears again. Where? We wake the next September morning. Elias stared. You're telling me you live 30 days a year? Yes. And the rest of the year simply doesn't happen. For us. That's impossible. Probably. Mara smiled faintly. Yet here we are. Elias walked away. He spent most of the morning trying to prove her wrong. The town hall records went back nearly 200 years. Each year contained exactly 30 days. September 1st through September 30th. Births, marriages, deaths, harvest yields, council meetings, repairs. Nothing from October through August. At noon he found something else. A photograph. It showed the village festival in 1989. Elias's mother stood beneath the harvest arch. She was 18. Beside her was a younger Evelyn, and holding Clara's hand was a dark-haired little girl, Mara. Elias sat alone in the records room for a long time. That evening, the first harvest dinner began. Nearly the entire village gathered in the square. There were long wooden tables covered with mismatched cloths. Bowls of roasted squash passed from hand to hand. Someone had made beef stew in enormous iron pots. There were potatoes with rosemary, loaves of dark bread, cider, baked pears, honey cakes, and more pies than Elias could count. A fiddle played near the fountain. Children ran between the tables. Old men argued about weather. Teenagers disappeared behind the town hall and returned pretending they had not been kissing. It was, Elias thought, the most ordinary, extraordinary evening he had ever witnessed. Nobody behaved like someone whose world would vanish in 8 days. They laughed. They ate. They complained about the potatoes. They discussed roof repairs. They planned next year's planting. That troubled Elias more than anything. He sat beside Evelyn. How can everyone be so calm? Practice. You vanish in 8 days. Yes. Doesn't that frighten you? Not anymore. What does it feel like? She considered. Like falling asleep without dreaming. And then? Morning. 11 months later. For you. For us, it's the next morning. Elias looked around. So you're all barely aging? About 1 month each year, he calculated. Evelyn smiled. I'm 136 years old outside the valley. Elias nearly dropped his cider. Here I'm 74. Across the table, Mara laughed. It was the first time Elias had heard her laugh without restraint. He looked at her. She caught him watching. For some reason, neither looked away immediately. Later there was dancing. Elias refused twice. On the third invitation, Mara simply took his hand. I don't dance. Everyone says that until music starts. I genuinely don't. Then move approximately in rhythm and look confident. He tried. He failed. Mara laughed again. The fiddle carried through the square. Above them, the maple leaves moved in the evening breeze. For several minutes, Elias forgot everything impossible about Briar Glen. He only knew Mara's hand in his. Her face turned toward him, the warmth of the crowd, the smell of apples and wood smoke, and an unexpected feeling he had not experienced in years. Belonging. The days that followed passed slowly and quickly at once. Thomas repaired what he could on the car. Elias helped Evelyn harvest apples. He walked with Mara through the western woods where the trees had become almost entirely gold. She showed him a pond where wild geese stopped each September. He showed her photographs on his phone. Cities, highways, the ocean, snow. Mara had never seen snow except in books. What's it like? She asked. Cold. Very poetic. It makes everything quiet. I'd like that. You've never wanted to leave? She took a while to answer. They were sitting beneath an oak overlooking the valley. Everyone here is allowed to leave, she said. Really? Until sunset on the 30th. And then? If you're outside the boundary when Briar Glen disappears, you remain outside. Forever? You can return the following September. So why don't people leave? Some do. Your parents? Mara nodded. When I was 23, they wanted more time. Do you see them? Every September. Elias understood. Outside the valley, they would have aged 11 months between meetings. Mara only 1. How old are they now? 78 and 80. And you? 40. There was sadness in her smile. They're my parents, but now they're old enough to be my grandparents. Why did you stay? Mara looked across the valley. At first because I was afraid. Of the outside? Of time. A leaf landed beside her hand. She turned it by the stem. Then I stayed because my grandmother was here. After she died, I stayed because the cafe needed someone. Then because people expected me to. And now, Mara looked at him. Now I'm not sure. On September 27th, Elias finally asked Evelyn why Clara had left. They were sorting apples in the barn. Good apples in one crate, bruised apples for cider. Evelyn continued working for a while. Your mother fell in love. With my father? Eventually. Elias waited. Clara loved this place, Evelyn said, but she wanted a life that moved forward. She placed an apple in the cider basket. She said 30 days wasn't enough. She wanted winter. She wanted birthdays. She wanted to grow old at the same speed as the people she loved. So she left. Yes, and never came back. Evelyn's hands stopped. She tried. Elias looked at her. When? The year after you were born. Something moved through him. A memory. A road. Red leaves. A woman's hand. She brought me here. Evelyn nodded. You were 4. The barn seemed to tilt around him. I remember. Only a little, I imagine. The bridge. Yes. The fountain. Yes. You. Evelyn's eyes filled. You called me Grandma Evie. Elias sat down on an overturned crate. Why didn't she return? Because she was afraid. Of what? That you would want to stay. He looked up. Evelyn sat beside him. Children born to families of Briar Glen sometimes feel the valley strongly. Clara did. You did too. What does that mean? You cried for 3 weeks after she took you away. I was 4. You kept asking when autumn would come back. Elias pressed a hand to his forehead. More memories were surfacing. A porch, an orchard, a girl with dark hair pushing him on a wooden swing. Mara, she was here. Yes. Mara knew me. Yes. Why didn't she say anything? I asked her not to. Elias stood. Why? Because I wanted you to remember on your own. Everyone keeps deciding what's best for me. Evelyn flinched. He regretted the words immediately, but they were true. My mother erased this place from my life. She was trying to protect you. From what? From having to choose. Elias stared at her. Outside the barn, wind moved through the orchard. Evelyn's voice softened. Your mother believed that if you remembered Briar Glen, someday you might return. And if you returned, you might discover that you could stay. Can I? Yes. The words seemed very small. Elias sat again. Because my mother was born here, because part of Briar Glen belongs to you. And if I stay past sunset on the 30th, you wake here next September, 30 days older. Yes. He thought about his apartment, his work, his car, his unanswered emails, the boxes waiting at his aunt's house, the life he had built without quite noticing that he was building it. And if I leave, you live normally. Can I come back? Every September if you can find the road. If? Evelyn smiled. The road doesn't appear to everyone. That night Elias found Mara closing the cafe. You remembered, she said. He nodded. Some. They walked through the square. The festival decorations were coming down. Only the harvest arch remained. Why didn't you tell me? I wanted to. But your grandmother asked me not to. He glanced at her. You pushed me on a swing. Mara smiled. You demanded it. I was 4. You were extremely demanding. Apparently I've improved. Debatable. They walked beyond the houses. The moon was rising above the fields. Elias said, Are you going to leave? Mara's steps slowed. Maybe. This year? Maybe. Because of me? No. Then she reconsidered. Not entirely. He waited. Mara looked toward the dark hills. I've spent 17 autumns thinking about leaving. Every year I find a reason not to. 17 months for you. 17 years for everyone else. She folded her arms against the cool air. My parents are old now. The world keeps moving without me. Sometimes people return and tell us about things that happened months ago, and to them it's history, but to us yesterday was last September. That sounds lonely. It can be. Then why stay? She smiled. Because it's beautiful. That was true. The valley below them was silver beneath the moon. Lights glowed in windows. The river moved quietly beyond the trees. It's hard to leave a beautiful thing, Mara said, even when you know beauty isn't the same as a life. On September 29th, the village began preparing to disappear. There was no panic. Laundry was brought in. Animals were moved to barns. Windows were latched. Food was stored. Thomas drained the fountain. Mrs. Alder covered the furniture in the inn's unused rooms. Children collected toys from yards. It felt less like preparing to vanish and more like preparing for winter. Elias helped Evelyn stack firewood. What happens to everything outside? The world continues. In this valley, people passing through see woods. No village? No. What if someone is standing where this house is? They won't be. How do you know? They simply won't. Elias laughed. That's an irritating answer. I've had 100 years to practice it. In the afternoon, Thomas arrived. Cars ready. Elias stared at him. You said October. Got creative. Thomas handed him the keys. She'll make the highway. After that, probably farther. Probably? Thomas shrugged. Life's full of mysteries. Elias suspected the mechanic had delayed intentionally. He didn't ask. That evening, the whole village gathered again. The final supper, they called it. There was less celebration this time, more conversation, longer hugs. A few people would leave tomorrow. A young couple planned to move to the outside world because they wanted children who would grow normally. An elderly man named Samuel intended to visit a daughter who was now older than he was. Nobody knew whether he would return. Elias sat between Mara and Evelyn. At some point, he realized Evelyn was holding his hand beneath the table. He squeezed hers. After dinner, people sang. Not sad songs, old songs, harvest songs, traveling songs, songs about rivers and fields and coming home. Elias knew none of them. By the third chorus, he was singing anyway. September 30th arrived bright and cold. The sky was a clear blue. Every tree in the valley seemed to have turned gold overnight. Elias woke early. His suitcase was packed. He carried it downstairs. Mrs. Alder was at the desk. Leaving? I don't know. She nodded. Good day for not knowing. He put the suitcase in his car. Then he walked. He walked past the schoolhouse, past the bakery, across the bridge, through the orchard. He sat beside the river. He tried to imagine staying. Tomorrow he would wake here. Except tomorrow would be September 1st of the following year. The outside world would leap forward 11 months. His work would be gone. His apartment would eventually be rented to someone else. People would wonder where he had disappeared. He would become one of those mysteries people discussed briefly before moving on. And yet here he would have Evelyn. He would have mornings at the Copper Kettle, walks through golden woods, harvest dinners, Mara. He tried to imagine leaving, highways, winter, spring, summer, ordinary months, snow, rain, heat, birthdays, aging. He realized something then. He did not want to escape time. For years he had behaved as though life were something to endure until it became easier. One assignment after another, one hotel after another, 1 year after another. Briar Glen offered something seductive, a life reduced to 30 golden days, no winter, no long gray February, no humid July, no ordinary Tuesday in March, only autumn, only beauty, only the season before things fell away. But perhaps that was not enough. Near noon he found Evelyn on her porch. She had already set 2 cups of tea on the table. You knew I'd come. I hoped. Elias sat. I don't think I can stay. Evelyn looked at him for a long time. Then she smiled. Good. He stared. Good? I didn't want you to. Then why tell me I could? Because it had to be your choice. He looked down at his tea. My mother chose the outside. Yes. Did you forgive her? Evelyn's smile trembled. Did you understand? Eventually. Elias looked at her. She died young. I know. She didn't get all that time she wanted. No. Doesn't that make leaving seem like a mistake? Evelyn reached across the table. No, darling. Her hand covered his. She didn't leave because she was promised more time. She left because she wanted her time to be hers. Elias felt his eyes burn. Evelyn continued. Clara had winter mornings. She had thunderstorms in June. She had you. She had a marriage that wasn't perfect and friends who irritated her and jobs she complained about. She burned dinners. She went to the ocean. She learned to drive. She watched you take your first steps. Evelyn smiled through tears. I missed almost all of it. I'm sorry. Don't be. Her fingers tightened around his. That was the price of my choice, not hers. For a while, neither spoke. Leaves drifted onto the porch. Finally, Elias said, Come with me. Evelyn closed her eyes. He knew before she answered. No. Why? Because this is my life. You could have years outside. Perhaps. You could see things you've never seen. I've seen enough things. Evelyn, I have friends here. People I've known for what feels to me like 70 years. I know every bend in this river. I know which apple trees bloom first. I know where the foxes den and which floorboard in my kitchen complains in damp weather. She looked toward the orchard. I don't need a different life merely because it contains more days. Elias understood. Not completely, but enough. Will I find the road next year? If you want to. That's another irritating answer. I know, he laughed. Then his grandmother stood. Now come inside. Why? I'm giving you something. From a drawer in the kitchen, Evelyn removed a small wooden box. Inside was a photograph. Elias at 4 years old. His mother stood behind him, Evelyn beside her, and Mara, perhaps 12, crouched in front holding a laughing little boy around the waist. Elias touched his mother's face. She looks happy. She was. Why didn't she tell me? Because memory can become a door. She was afraid you'd spend your life trying to reopen it. Elias looked at the photograph. Maybe she was right. Maybe. Evelyn closed his fingers around it. But doors aren't only for going backward. By late afternoon, several residents had gathered at the Eastern Bridge. Those leaving carried suitcases. The young couple stood beside a borrowed truck. Samuel wore a suit and held a small leather bag. Mara was nowhere in sight. Elias found her at the café. She had emptied the pastry case. Chairs stood upside down on tables. A suitcase rested beside the counter. He stopped in the doorway. Mara looked at him. For several seconds, neither spoke. You're leaving, he said. I think so. Think? I've been thinking for 17 years. I'm trying something different. Deciding? Exactly. He smiled. Where will you go? My parents live in Vermont. You'll see snow. So I've been told. She looked at his coat. That's you? I'm leaving. Something moved across her face. Relief, perhaps, or disappointment, maybe both. Where will you go? North first. I still have an aunt's house to deal with. And then? I don't know. Good? He laughed. You people are strangely fond of uncertainty. We have very predictable Septembers. Mara lifted her suitcase. They walked together toward the bridge. The whole village seemed to have gathered there. The sun was descending. Long golden light filled the valley. People hugged. Nobody hurried. Those staying stood on one side, those leaving on the other. Elias hugged Evelyn last. He held her longer than he expected. Next year, he said, perhaps. I'll come. I know. How? She touched his cheek. Because now you remember the road. He kissed her forehead. Then he crossed the bridge. Mara walked beside him. At the far end, Elias turned. Briar Glen glowed in the evening light. The roofs, the church, the orchard, the river. People stood waving. Evelyn was among them. The sun touched the western ridge. For one instant, every window in the village flashed gold. Then a wind moved through the valley. Leaves rose from the ground. Thousands of them. They swirled across the road in a great shining cloud. Elias lifted an arm against them. Mara caught his hand. The wind passed. The leaves settled. Briar Glen was gone. There were only trees. No houses, no bridge behind them. No church, no orchard. Only a quiet valley beneath an autumn sky. Mara stood perfectly still. Her hand remained in his. So, Elias said after a while. She looked at him. That's what it looks like. Apparently. Apparently. You've never seen it from this side? Never. They stood there until the sun disappeared. Then Mara laughed softly. What? I have absolutely nowhere to sleep tonight. Elias smiled. I know an inn. In Briar Glen? Unfortunately, yes. That's inconvenient. My car is just up the road. They walked through the gathering dusk. Elias's car started on the first attempt. Thomas, he thought. He would have to thank him next September. They drove north. At first, Mara watched everything. Streetlights, gas stations, billboards, traffic signals. A 24-hour supermarket made her laugh. When they stopped for coffee at a roadside diner, she spent 5 minutes examining the jukebox. Elias watched her discover a world he had stopped noticing. It changed things. At midnight, they found a motel. Mara stood outside her room staring at the key card. This is ridiculous. You just tap it. I did. Green light. I saw no green light. Give it here. I can operate a door. Apparently not this one. She eventually succeeded without his help. Good night, Elias. Good night, Mara. He entered his room. For once, the anonymous bed and beige walls did not make him feel lonely. The next morning was October 1st. For Mara, it was the first October 1st of her life. She stood outside beneath a pale sunrise. Well? Elias asked. She considered. It looks suspiciously like September. Give it time. They drove north together. They visited Evelyn's Valley once more before leaving the county. There was no road, only trees. Mara stood at the edge of the forest for a long time. Then she turned away. Winter came. Mara saw she loved it for 3 days and complained about it for 4 months. Elias visited more often than he had intended. By spring, he no longer needed an excuse. Mara found work in a bakery near her parents' home. Her mother cried whenever she looked at her for the first 2 weeks. Her father tried not to. Time was complicated for them. They had lost years differently, but they began again where they could. Elias finished settling his aunt's estate. Then he did something that surprised everyone who knew him. He declined his next long assignment. He rented a small house in Vermont. Not with Mara, near Mara. There was a difference, and they both respected it. They learned each other outside autumn. Mara was impatient in grocery stores. Elias hated gardening. She loved thunderstorms. He liked early mornings. She became homesick whenever maple leaves turned red. He sometimes woke thinking of Evelyn's porch. Summer arrived. Then August. One evening, Mara came to Elias's house carrying 2 cups of coffee. 30 days, she said. He knew immediately what she meant. Until September, she nodded. Are you going back? Yes. Staying? Mara looked toward the western sky. No. You sound certain. I am. Then she smiled. But I'm bringing my mother. On August 31st, they drove south. Mara's parents followed in another car. They spent the night in Bellwether County. Before dawn, Elias woke. He dressed quietly and stepped outside. The world smelled of late summer. Mara was already waiting beside the cars. Couldn't sleep, he asked. No, me neither. They drove while the sky brightened. The old country road was not on any modern map. Still, Elias found the turn. Fields, stone wall, the first maple trees touched with red. Then the wooden sign appeared. Briar Glen, 3 miles. Mara began crying. She laughed at herself and wiped her face. Elias reached across the console. She took his hand. The road entered the golden woods. It descended, and the village was there. Smoke rose from chimneys. The river shone. The fountain splashed in the square. People were opening shutters. To them, one night had passed. To Elias, nearly a year. Evelyn stood on her porch in the same brown cardigan. When she saw the cars coming, she shaded her eyes. Then she recognized them. Elias parked. His grandmother came down the steps. He crossed the yard. This time there was no hesitation. You're late, Evelyn said as he hugged her. By how much? She looked toward the rising sun. About 20 minutes. Mara ran past them toward her parents. There were tears and laughter and voices overlapping. Elias stood with Evelyn beneath the maple trees. You came back, she said. I told you I would. People say many things in September. I meant it. She looked at him carefully. You look different. It's been a year. For me, breakfast was yesterday, Elias smiled. That's going to take some getting used to. It never does. They walked toward the house. The orchard was exactly as he remembered it. Golden light came through the branches. Apples hung heavy among the leaves. Behind them, Mara called his name. He turned. She stood at the gate. Her hair was longer. Her cheeks were pink from crying. She looked older than she had when she'd left. Not much, but enough. And Elias suddenly understood what Evelyn had meant. Time was not merely something that took. It gave shape. It added. It changed the face of someone you loved because days had happened to them. Mara came over. Evelyn looked between them and smiled knowingly. Neither acknowledged it. Breakfast became lunch. Lunch became a gathering. By evening, half the village had heard every story Mara could tell about snow, supermarkets, elevators, crowded highways, and a disastrous attempt to make Thanksgiving dinner. Thomas listened carefully. How did you burn the turkey? The oven was deceptive. It's an oven. You weren't there. Elias sat beneath the maple trees, Evelyn beside him, Mara across the table. Around them, Briar Glen began another brief golden year. 30 days. No more. No less. And this time Elias did not think of it as a place outside time. He understood it differently. Briar Glen was simply a place where time had chosen another rhythm, like a song played slowly, like a river taking the longer path through a valley, like an old story told once each year and never quite the same way twice. He would leave again. Mara would leave with him. Evelyn would remain. There would be sorrow in that. There would also be another September, if fortune allowed. And between those Septembers there would be winter, spring, summer, ordinary mornings, unexpected afternoons, arguments, meals, work, long drives, snowfall, heat, birthdays, all the imperfect days his mother had once chosen. Later that month, on the final evening, Elias and Mara walked to the eastern bridge. The village gathered behind them. This time leaving did not feel like losing Briar Glen. The place had become part of the year, a season they could return to. Evelyn hugged them both. Next September, Elias said. She smiled. Perhaps. He had learned not to argue with that word. He and Mara crossed the bridge. Halfway over, she stopped. Elias? Hmm? When we get back, I want to see the ocean in winter. Cold. So you've said. And windy. Excellent. And almost everything will be closed. Even better. He looked at her. She was smiling. All right. They continued walking. Behind them, the bells of Briar Glen rang across the valley. Once, twice, then again. The final sunlight touched the trees. Elias did not turn around immediately. He listened. He listened to the bells and the river and the wind moving through thousands of autumn leaves. Then he looked back. His grandmother stood among her friends. The village glowed around them. For a moment, it seemed that Briar Glen had always been there and always would be. Perhaps, in its own way, that was true. The wind rose. Golden leaves filled the valley. Mara slipped her hand into his, and when the leaves settled again, there were only trees beneath the evening sky. They stood quietly. Not because there was nothing to say, because some departures did not need words. Eventually, they returned to the car. Elias started the engine. The road ahead wound through the darkening countryside toward towns where porch lights were coming on, toward diners still serving coffee, toward highways carrying people home, toward a winter Mara had not yet learned to complain about properly. They drove until the valley was far behind them. And all through the following year, whenever Elias encountered the first cool morning after summer, or smelled apples baking, or saw a maple beginning to turn, he remembered a road that did not appear on maps. He remembered that somewhere beyond ordinary time, a village waited beneath bare and invisible branches. A grandmother slept between Septembers. A fountain waited for water. An orchard waited for morning. Tables waited beneath the trees. And when the year had made its long circle, when summer softened and the first autumn wind traveled over the fields, Briar Glen would wake, shutters would open, chimneys would smoke, the river would catch the morning sun, someone would sweep the steps of the town hall, someone would begin baking apple cake, and on a quiet country road where the stone wall turned beneath the maples, an old wooden sign would appear once more. Briar Glen, 3 miles, for those who remembered the way.